G20 energy ministers held an emergency conference call today to talk about oil prices. They've plummeted in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic. Now it appears there is a global effort underway to stabilize the market. OPEC nations have a tentative deal to cut production by 10 million barrels a day. So will Canada follow suit? Seamus O'Regan is the Minister of Natural Resources. He joins us from St. John's. Hi, Minister. Good to have you with us again.
Hi, Vashi. Good to be back.
I want to start off actually by asking about how you would characterize what OPEC agreed to. Is it a deal? Is it a done deal to cut 10 million barrels a day?
Well, I think it's a step in the right direction. We didn't get into the numbers of that deal. We, in fact, didn't get into numbers at all in this particular meeting of the G20. This was really about, first of all, agreeing upon a shared goal here, which is getting rid of volatility as best we can. And from both the producer side and from the consumer side, an acknowledgement clearly that instability is not in anybody's best interests. So, how do we move forward from here? How do we share data? How do we, come to an agreement on what we can do about this price instability? And I think, movement by OPEC Plus, going in that direction is obviously a good thing.
Why weren't numbers discussed at all? And could I infer from that, or would I be wrong to infer that output was not discussed then?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't the mandate of the meeting. Certainly, let me be very clear, isn't my mandate, because that jurisdiction lies clearly with the provinces. Now, having said that, I keep in very close touch with all energy ministers and natural resource ministers right across the country. And certainly we've been talking an awful lot over the past few weeks, but particularly leading into this meeting and leading into meetings that I've had, over the phone with the U.S. Secretary of Energy, Dan Werent. I've been talking frequently and often with the ministers of energy for Alberta, for Saskatchewan, and here for Newfoundland and Labrador. And I spoke to them last night about, my intention going into this meeting, which was really, I had a speaking role because Canada, of course, is the fourth largest producer of oil in the world, but also a forward-looking country that's looking at net zero and dealing with transition. So, I wanted to let them know where I stood. My mission, first and foremost, was to lay out the urgency of reaching price stability. I'm reminded here in St. John's, and where I am right now and where I have been during this pandemic. But before that, as frequently as I went to Saskatchewan and Alberta, I'm reminded about what workers and their families are going through with this instability. And, that was clearly on my mind when I went in there today to really impress upon my colleagues how imperative it is that we come to an agreement, a structure on how we can achieve price stability.
On the issue of price stability, I'll tell you why I'm asking about output. Everything I've read so far about the potential deal with OPEC or OPEC Plus is that they will then be asking the United States and Canada to decrease their output. I know there already are production caps, and I take your point that it's provincial jurisdiction. Have there been conversations between you and your counterpart or Premier Kenney about further output cuts in the province?
No, but I mean, there are a couple of things that are out there for sure. As you acknowledged, there is already a formal curtailment that Alberta has in place, which is acknowledged. I think by all the players, and I think, in fact, curtailment is not an easy thing to do. So as Minister Savage reminded me, there are things we could actually teach other people about how you achieve curtailment. And we also know that production is well behind. Alberta now is between 500 and I think 750,000 barrels per day behind in production now. Because of two crises that are occurring. One dealing directly with price instability in the marketplace, and of course the other one demand driven, which is, we're not driving as much anymore, not nearly as much, or flying nearly as much, so demand is way down.
Are there plans? Actually, let me be more explicit. Is the position of the federal government and the provincial government that no further cuts are needed to output?
No, I think the position right now is, aiming at price stability. I mean, what do we need to do to talk to our partners in order to make sure that we achieve that for the good of our economy and for our workers and for their families? I mean, how do we go about achieving price stability? One of the most important things we could do, obviously, is make sure that we are talking often and frequently with the United States, and I have been with the U.S. Energy Secretary Dan Werent. And on the flip side, making sure that I'm talking often with the provinces here on how we can go forward.
Has there been any pressure from the United States to also cut output here?
I think the great thing about Secretary Werent is that he has been in the Energy Department for some time. So one thing that he does know is how integrated our oil market is. Newfoundland and Labrador is more internationally exposed, where it sells its product. But we know obviously with Alberta and Saskatchewan, it's with the United States. And so he comes into it knowing full well how integrated that market is. There was no learning curve with Dan Werent. So he knows how important that is as well. And that's really important that we're aligned.
Does the probability of a deal that would positively affect price stability at all affect your government's pledge to offer some aid to the oil sector?
Oh, no. One thing that we know for sure, we've been working on it for some weeks, and we're hoping that we'll be able to show something very soon to those involved in the oil industry right across the country. We know what's important to them. I remember my first meeting as these crises kind of came upon us, I think about three and a half weeks ago, dealing with membership of the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, and they joked that, if their top 5 priorities, those are, would be liquidity, 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 and liquidity. I mean, trying to make sure that companies and people who work for those companies are whole, so that when we get out on the other side of this, our industry is intact as it can be. That is their top priority. And when I speak to labor and I speak to labor leaders, and in fact, last night speaking with the National Chief Perry Bellegarde, everybody affected by this industry, which is hundreds of thousands of people in this country, it is all about the viability of those companies and ensuring some certainty for workers and their families.
So I have to tell you, Minister, I've listened very carefully to everything the Prime Minister has said when he's asked a similar question about what aid is coming. And it's a very different answer. It's one that's primarily, actually solely focused on the worker. He's been asked even specifically about whether the federal government would be willing to backstop the kind of liquidity you just described. Is it the position of the federal government that you are actively looking at help specifically for companies?
Well, looking for companies, but also it's very important, to talk about the wage subsidy, for instance, which is, once we expanded it to, all sizes of companies, it is being used extensively in the oil patch in order to make sure that they hang on to, these incredibly talented and experienced men and women who drive the oil patch and drive, in fact, our oil industry right across the country, including here in Newfoundland and Labrador. So, we are looking at how can we support and protect all facets of the industry. And there are so many beyond just directly, industry itself. I mean, there's so many service organizations, there are so many, different groups that tie in, whose jobs, are high paying and highly skilled, and we need to make sure that we retain as many of them as we can. We are the 4th largest oil producer in the world. It is a very proud industry. It is an industry that, had been working and is continuing to work through this on transition. As the investment climate around the world has been changing, and I've been talking extensively, as I said, with my provincial counterparts about that. But, right now what we are focusing on are workers and the companies that they work for.
Okay, so just so that I'm clear, though, that means that federal aid that could buoy liquidity for companies is not off the table.
Oh, I mean, the finance minister is going to be speaking directly about this very soon. But, we've heard companies loud and clear. And, what they're looking at right now is liquidity. Well, liquidity, what does that mean? Really, what it means is certainty and stability. And that's what everybody is looking for right now, including workers and their families.
What does very soon mean, Minister? And I ask with respect because the finance minister back on March 25th said this package was coming in the coming hours and days. It's been weeks.
Soon, but as soon as we can possibly, we are working very hard to make sure. We're working very hard to make sure that we could get it right. And the consultations continue. And again, I'm hoping that we'll be able to deliver that very soon.
This week?
Very soon.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Mr. O'Regan. Appreciate your time this evening.
Thanks, Vashi. Good to talk to you.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.